Hey, how's it going, guys? This is Steve with Steve's Mystery Meat Matchups. This is the first video I'm recording on this channel. Just as a disclaimer, I'm not a financial advisor, so you assume all the risk, and don't just bet what I'm telling you just because I say so. Use your own judgment. Anyway, this is the first video of this channel, as I said. I will go more into it at the end. Um, so let's get into it. And really, the question is, will this rematch be different? So, a quick fighter breakdown. Chepe Mariscal, he is the slightly younger man, with Pat Sabatini coming in with the slight advantage in height and reach. Chepe trains out of Syndicate MMA, which is in Las Vegas, and Pat Sabatini trains with the guys in Philly like Saltman Joe Pfeiffer, the Salt Miner, and Sean Brady. As you could see with the odds at the time that I made this, Pat Sabatini is the slight favorite. It's basically almost a pick'ems, but I'm not sure what it is currently. Um, so make sure you check that always. As you can see in their last five, Chepe is undefeated. All of those coming in the UFC. Pat Sabatini is 3-2, but one of them is to Diego Lopez, which you can take with a little bit of a grain of salt. But we'll get into those matchups in a sec. So looking at their last five fights, Chepe Mariscal, he is undefeated. He has decision wins over Ricardo Ramos, Damon Jackson, Morgan Charrier, and Trevor Peek with a submission win over Jack Jenkins. That is a decent level of competition. Ricardo Ramos, I think he's better than his record shows. He just seems to sell a lot of fights. Charrier and Damon Jackson are decent. Jack Jenkins has done okay in the UFC. I think he picked up a win in his last fight. And honestly don't really know that much about Trevor Peek. Looking at Pat Sabatini, he has a really good win over Joanderson Brito, is by decision. He submitted Jonathan Pierce and he submitted Lucas Almeida. He does have a knockout loss to Diego Lopez, but that was really, before everyone. That was really the fight everyone realized how good Diego Lopez is. So you can kind of take that one, for what it is. That's one of the best fighters in the featherweight division and possibly a future champion. And then there was a loss to Damon Jackson, so that is one common opponent that they both have. Yeah, so I always do like to take a look at some other key fights that they have. Most of these fights have come in the regional scene, except for Jamal Emmers, which, sorry, that fight he did win that by submission past Sabatini. It was a heel hook. So I don't know why it says unanimous decision. That was by submission. But he also has a win over Damon Blackshear, who is a solid UFC fighter with a decent amount of wins and also a very good grappler. So you could take that into account. And I did highlight or bold, italicize, and underline his split decision loss to Chepe Mariscal on the regional scene. But obviously, that was 7 years ago. They are probably different fighters now, and it was a split decision loss as it is. So at least one judge felt that he won the fight. But moving on to Chepe, he has a loss on the regional scene to Steve Garcia, but obviously that is a ranked featherweight. And if you watch that fight, that was one of the fights that is available on YouTube. Chepe got dropped in like the first 10 seconds, but he's able to battle back, make it competitive. Ended up being a TKO, I think, just because there was blood coming from the back of his head. But it was not like he was out cold. He didn't give up. It was a pretty competitive fight, but Steve Garcia was the better man that day. But he also has a loss to Joe Anderson Brito, so that's a common opponent that they both have. Although that was back in the regional scene. He also has a win over another ranked featherweight, which is Yusuf Zalal. And then obviously there's the Pat Sabatini fight. And he also has losses back against Bryce Mitchell and, crazy fought Gregor Gillespie, which if you don't know who that is, he was, a surging contender at the lightweight division until he got his head kicked through the freaking roof by Kevin Lee. But so that's some more key fights that they have. So looking at Chepe Mariscal's strengths, he has very high level judo, great clinch grappling, and he also has very good clinch striking. In his fights, you can even see in the Steve Garcia fight, in the Ricardo Ramos fight, those are two that are available on YouTube. You couldn't find the fight, by the way, between these two the first time. I couldn't find it, at least. Um, Let me know if you guys can find it. But anyway, he uses judo very well in the UFC. When people um, have pressured him, he's able to get those throws, those sweeps against the wall. That's where judo kind of shines in MMA. He uses it pretty well, gets puts people into pretty bad positions, takes their back. He's also a Division three or JUCO wrestler, so he has a wrestling background. But I also want to highlight his submission defense against Ricardo Ramos, who is a guy that has tried to go for leg entanglements in the past. He shows that he actually knows what he's doing a little bit, unlike a lot of MMA fighters. He tries to clear the knee line, tries to work, either escape the position, hide his heel, or, even work into his own leg entanglements. So that'll come up key against a guy like Sabatini, who had a great heel hook win over Jamal Emmers, but I don't know why Jamal Emmers was trying to do a toe hold against a heel hook. That's unless there's a huge skill gap, that's the toe hold's rarely going to beat a heel hook, which uses much more leverage. Another strength is he has very high level cardio, and he makes his fights his version of ugly. He's like the featherweight version of Merab, and he actually trains with Merab. So it's two guys that fight very similarly, and maybe he's learning how Merab incorporates that kind of style to beat the best of the best, and we'll see how that translates in this fight. But he does make these fights his version of ugly. Against Steve Garcia, that was a good fight. He made it very competitive, especially when it got ugly. Even though Steve Garcia also thrives in those situations, so it didn't work against him, but he did get back into the fight, making it very ugly. I think his hands have improved, and his dirty boxing is very good since was on the regional scene. Look at his fight with Ricardo Ramos versus Steve Garcia. I mean, you can see it's like night and day. His offense, his dirty boxing, and I think he can use that to his advantage. And also his chin, it's good. He has gotten knocked out a few times, but it's usually TKOs, and he gets dropped, but he doesn't get put out cold very easily. So I think he has a solid chin, and really his heart. He got dropped so badly against Steve Garcia, but he was able to work back into the fight. He does not give up on himself. He will never give up on himself. He's just going to keep putting on the pressure. I think that's a big advantage for him in this fight. And obviously, he has some losses, but the level of competition is. I mean, Gregor Gillespie, when you're early in your career, that's a tough fight, and I think his level of competition has made him into a much better fighter. So moving on to the weaknesses, I think his striking defense is pretty terrible. He gets hit a lot. Thank God for his good chin, and it's good that he has such a way of imposing his will, because he does get hit a lot and he gets dropped a lot. But fortunately, he's usually able to overwhelm. Like I'm telling you, similar to Merab. Merab does get hit, especially earlier in his career. Like he reminds me of Merab when he fought like Marlon Moraes. Like he gets hit, but he can come back and pour the pressure on. His cardio is always better than everyone else's. Also, he's sometimes a little bit over aggressive against Steve Garcia. He got his back taken, because he was a little like swinging for the fences, becoming a little bit over aggressive, and put himself into bad positions. I mean, he wins fights by being aggressive, but so sometimes it's gonna bite you. But I don't think he should bail on that, because that's what makes him who he is. Also, he doesn't really kick that much. He does throw some low kicks, but I haven't really seen him, throw many kicks to the body, work to the head, use teeps that much. I mean, I don't think it fits with his style. He likes that marauding style, but that's just something to take note of. He might not be taking away the pressure of a guy like Sabatini, who's a pressure grappler, if he's not going to the body with kicks into the legs. And obviously his finishing ability, he can finish people, especially like TKOs. But even against Ricardo Ramos, I mean, he almost made him quit on the stool, but he wasn't able to put him away. And I'm not sure how much that'll be tough in this fight, because Sabatini is not a big power puncher, but there's always a concern. Looking at the strengths of Sabatini, his grappling is probably one of the best in the featherweight division. Honestly, it might even be the best. He's a Division I wrestler at Ryder, which is actually down the street from where I live. He is a legit jiu-jitsu black belt. He's not just this like, oh, I've been training a while, so I'm getting my black belt. Like he competes in CFFC and Fury competitions, and he beats. I mean, he wins most of his grappling matches, and on top of that, he uses grappling very well in MMA. He's great on top, and that's getting to the next point. He's great on top. His ground and pound has looked very good, especially in I think there's a fight on the regional scene. I forget the guy's name that he fought. It was CFFC, and he beat the ever living shit out of that guy. And eventually, he worked his way to an armbar. So his submissions are he's always hunting for submissions, but if he can't get them, his ground and pound is very good. Also, he is very athletic. You know, he isn't like the best striker, but he moves very well, and that typically gets him out of trouble, especially against better strikers, because he just moves very well. He's very fluid. He bounces on his toes. He's not flat-footed. So I think his he does have the athletic advantage in this matchup. Also, he does have strong pace and cardio. It's going to be a pressure, high-paced grappler versus another one, and we'll see. Honestly, it could come down to whose cardio is going to break, who's going to break the other guy, and I think it'll be interesting to watch. I think the most interesting part of this matchup is that they both are great cardio pressure wrestlers. So who's going to break? That's really what I think it comes down to. Weaknesses in Pat's game, he is really not a threat on the feet in terms of power. He's not knocking anybody out, especially a guy. I don't think he's going to be able to knock out Chepe. And unfortunately, against guys like Chepe, similar to Merab, I feel like you have to knock them out. I mean, Sabatini does have really, really good grappling, which maybe that'll be able to counter that pressure wrestling of Chepe. But he's not a threat on the feet, and I think Chepe might just march him down the whole time. So we'll see. His striking defense is not great. I think it's better than Chepe's. I'll tell you that. He doesn't get hit as much. But I also put Chinny. I don't know if he's Chinny. He did get knocked out by Diego Lopez, but that's a completely different fighter. He's huge. He hits like a truck, and I take that with a grain of salt. His Damon Jackson loss wasn't like he got put out. He was a TKO, but I do want to put that into my next point. He's dealing with adversity. I mean, he lost to him in like a minute, and I mean, he just flattened out, like full back mount, getting like the shit beaten out of him, and it almost like looks like he quit. He looks great. He always looks great when he's on top, really beating up people. But if he's put in those bad situations, is he gonna quit or can he keep going? And I don't think he quit against Diego Lopez, but I did see some quit against Damon Jackson. It was a bad position, but against a guy like Chepe, it might be tough. If that is a factor. So Chepe's path to victory, he's got a relentless pressure, make Sabatini fight on the back foot. He's a wrestler. He's going to want to get to the ground. It's very tough to shoot when you're on your back foot the whole time, when you're eating kicks, punches. And, I want to go into the bottom point. He should have a lot of pressure, but enter on his own terms. And what I mean is, use feints. Don't just get into I mean, you can get into a brawl. It might help, but enter into your own terms. Like, feint level changes, feint the uppercuts, the knees to get him from level changing, and then, use those feints to get better strikes. I think that is a part of his game that can evolve and probably should evolve, especially as he fights these better fighters. And then use your judo. I mean, if he gets over aggressive, I've seen him use it against Ricardo Ramos. They start pressuring really hard and he just gets a throw in. He uses judo very well, even out on the open. And also clinch striking. His clinch striking is very good. He almost made Ricardo Ramos quit from his clinch striking. It's kind of like RDR, uppercuts, knees. He can make people quit with his striking. So Pat Sabatini, his path to victory is he's got to get Chepe on his back, like on the ground, and start moving to dangerous positions. I don't see Chepe as someone that can submit Pat Sabatini off of his back. And, I think once he gets him into dangerous positions, mount, side control, take his back, I think he might be able to TKO him or at least control him and win by decision. So I think if he can take him down, that makes this fight very interesting, and that could win him the fight. He does that for 2 rounds, he'll win by decision. He's got to pressure the pressure fighter. Like he shouldn't, like I said, for Chepe's path to victory, he is going to want to make Sabatini move backwards. Sabatini's got to go the other way. If he can make Chepe move backwards, Chepe is not a great long range fighter. I think that he's not going to be able to like spark him out on the feet like Diego Lopez did. So I think if he can make a move backwards, that would work well. And also, but don't brawl and manage the distance. Obviously pressure him, but don't just go charging in. If you get into a brawl, I think Chepe does have more power and he's got a better chin than past Sabatini. So that just I don't understand. Like he has great skills, so I would not understand if he got into a brawl. But I don't see him doing something like that. So I think he'll be able to manage that. I also like to consider. I just look at the betting odds, see it that's interesting. So if you look here at the closing range, these are all Chepe's fights. These are all wins. These all came in the UFC. And you could see that, against Morgan Charrier, against Jack Jenkins, he was the underdog, and he actually He is closing right now as the underdog at the time I made this, with the Pat Sabatini fight. But he has wins as the underdog, and he's also one of the favorite. But those are decently heavy favorites. But clearly he can win in the underdog spot. You look at now this is Pat Sabatini's closing range, and there's a lot more fights to look through. There's a few grappling matches too, so kind of focus in on the. If you look at the Jonathan Pierce fight, if you look at the Tucker Lutz fight, he was an underdog in those fights, and he came in with a win. Even the Jamal Emmers fight, he came away with a win as the underdog. So if he ends up closing as the underdog, he can win that. But as a favorite, Diego Lopez, he was a slight favorite, is more of a pick'ems, but I won't consider that as much because that's a different level of fighter. But he against Damon Jackson, he was a pretty heavy favorite. He lost that fight. So he has lost fights as the favorite. So I mean, I don't know how much you want to look into this, but that is just something I like to consider and put out there. So for my prediction, I am going with Chepe Mariscal, likely by decision, a possible TKO. And I think it's going to become by decision or TKO. I don't really see either one of these guys submitting each other. Why? Because I think he understands the leg entanglements and submissions. I think the guys that Sabatini is beating don't have that level of understanding, at least in MMA. Obviously, he's submitting people in grappling matches who are very good, but this is MMA, and I think that a guy that actually knows it, unlike Jamal Emmers, who shouldn't have been going for a toe hold versus a heel hook. I think that'll be tough. And he trains with Merab, and they fight similar and have that level of heart. So I think that'll pay off in this fight. So we'll see if it does. But I could see that training with guys like that could really make Chepe's game go to a new level. And I've seen massive improvement. If you look at his Steve Garcia to his Ricardo Ramos fight, which was his last fight, just massive improvement. And I think every fight, he's gotten better. So that's going to wrap it up. I am going to be coming out with a blog once I get the website up. And basically what we're going to be doing in this blog and this channel is we're going to look at, prelims or early prelim fights, just one. And, because people always are looking at the big fights. Like this week, it's Islam and Jack Della Maddalena. And so I think we should look more at these other fights. And also, they're fights that are close. Like you saw, this is in near pick'ems. I don't want to be that asshole that's like, oh, I'm going to pick the minus 400 level favorite. And it's just like, that's ridiculous. So, yeah. So thanks, guys. See you in the next one.